morning. Today, of course, is Hei Teves, which, of course, we famously celebrate in Chabad with regards to the return of the seforim that were taken during what was you could call sort of a family-related dispute, and the Rebbe said it's not really a legitimate dispute; it's a gneva. And ultimately, the seforim were returned after the court recognized, acknowledged, accepted the Rebbe's position. And after a few more necessary steps, the seforim actually were returned, and that's a big simcha. So I don't want to get into the specific details relating to this particular case. First of all, So first of all, from the it's Masha from the Rebbe doesn't want people dwelling so much on the story itself. And number two, I'm sure you can hear it from many other sources far better. Then, of course, there's the whole ruchnistic aspect of the day, and I'm not going to get into that either. You can leave that for the Fabrengens, etc. But on a day like this, we can't really talk about other things either. So based on what the Rebbe said, that this is a day that's essentially dedicated to seforim, so I would like to discuss and elaborate various issues, various instances that are cited in seforim that are connected to various aspects of this incident of Hei Teves. So that way we can honor Hei Teves through being ma'ayin in seforim and look at Hei Teves through the prism through the lens of what seforim have to say about similar things. Now, when you have this nexus of seforim and gnevis and or yerushas, so there actually are a number of possible topics we could explore. So I'm going to start, though, with the question of actually stealing seforim, the issue, the problem with stealing seforim. So in the shalos teshuvos of the Rif, I hope and assume that I don't have to introduce who the Rif is. Like other great Rishonim, we don't give everyone an introduction. They don't need an introduction. So in the shalos teshuvos of the Rif, Siman Kuf Lamed Gimel, there's a shayla, Echad min Talmidim, Ganav Sifrei Pirushin Lachavere. One of the Talmidim stole his friend's Sifrei Pirushin, whatever those are. Seemingly not his friend's Chedushim, but back then seforim were very scarce. And his friend had some sefer that he felt was important to his learning, and he saw no choice but to abscond with it. And his friend confronted him. He said, "Hey, you took my Sifrei Pirushin." So he said, "Well, let me tell you something. I'm nishpa, shvua, chamura, that I'm not giving them back to you until I finish copying them. I need the seforim, they're important. It's very hard to get your hands on a sefer 1,000 years ago. And I need it. I'm not giving it back till I copy it." And the shayla concludes, "V'yesh mishahira shemuter leganvam." There was apparently someone of some authority who said, "Yeah, you're allowed to, a gneva, seforim, it's fine." So they asked the Rif. So the Rif answers, the Rif responds. And this is also printed in the Shalos Teshuvos Harashba. It says on top, Rif Zal, it just got included somehow also in the Kovitz of the Teshuvos Harashba, that the Goinev and the Moira, the one who legitimized it, it's all Shalei Kedin. It's all wrong, not correct. Why did the person who say it's mutter say it's mutter? Must be because it's for Tivrei Torah. The person wants to learn Torah, so that's a mitzvah, so it's got to be a good thing. But it's a mistake because it says in Gemara, lulav hagazel, pasul, you steal a lulav, you can't be yaitz to the mitzvah of lulav. I want to do a mitzvah. No, but you did an aver of stealing. And it's a pasuk, ani Hashem oyev mishpat, sayne gazel ba'olah. So therefore, the person who gave his okay is a chayter machti. That's his problem. And the Goinev, he was over on 3 lavin. Number one, he was a Goinev, he stole. Number two, he swore he's not returning that. And that's Nishba Lavrel Divrei Torah. So that itself is a shtickle chiddush. Right away, when you swear you're not going to give it back, you're being over on the Heshavas Edzela, you're swearing against that, you're being over on those Divrei Torah. And then the Rif says you're also being over on Gezel, and there's like a word here about how you're being over on Geneva and Gezel together, which is its own discussion of when and how that works, because originally he took it behind the guy's back, and now he's resisting returning it. So is that two separate things? Is that what the Rif is saying, or you automatically are over on both? That's a whole separate discussion. And he concludes against Va'af Oisa Mitzvah, Sheneskaven Lo also be Yadi. That mitzvah that he was aiming for, it didn't work. It says, Lulev HaGazel Pasul, meaning Shlei also be Yadi Mitzvah, he did not succeed in doing the mitzvah of Lulev, so the same applies here. Now, there's a lot to discuss, a lot to unpack here in this tshuva of the If, which seems was not cited a lot, meaning in the last few hundred years, you have a certain number of svarim that discuss it, but relatively speaking, it was not, didn't make it into Shulchan Aruch, wasn't discussed by Rishonim. But, so besides the questions of the Nishba, Lavar David Torah, or the Geneva versus Gzela, but first of all, this Nakuda, you're saying that it's Geneva. Happens to be that in many Svarim, you have this idea that if someone gives you a Pekadon, gives you a Sefer to watch, and the assumption usually is you can't touch a Pekadon, it's not for you to use, to look at. But, so let's say it's a Sefer, so it's also to open, and certainly not open and start copying, but it says in Svarim, in the Mordechai, etc., that if you're a Talmud Chacham, it is mutter to take a peek and to use the Svarim. And they cite, among other things, from a Medrash Mishlei, that she'ein levazos mi shegoynev divrei Torah umatikon. That's how the quote is explicitly given. You shouldn't shame, you shouldn't say that someone who's stealing divrei Torah in order to copy them is a bad guy. And this heter for the Talmud Chacham actually made its way into Shulchan Aruch, in Choshen Mishpat, in Siman Reish Tzadik Beis, which is about touching a pekadon. In the Ramah and Sif Chav, the Ramah says that Talmud Chacham is allowed to look at the Sefer, use the Sefer. And you have the Sman, the Shach there, and the Shach Taka brings this quote that Ein Lavazes Mishigoyne Divrei Torah Matikon, which is its own discussion, and there's a difference between the Sman and the Shach there. Not getting into that. Now, there's another, that's one discussion relating to this riff. Is it, obviously there it's Pekadon, it's still different. The Lashon is Ein Lavazes Mishigoyne, but on the other hand, it's still a Pekadon, as opposed to here where you literally just took something without Rishus. There's another discussion here, though, about this whole idea of mitzvah haba ba'avera, because there's a tshuva that Rashba about a stolen Megillah. Lulav HaGazel is possible. What about other things? What about other mitzvahs? What if you steal a Megillah? So the Rashba cites the Yerushalmi. The Yerushalmi says already that there's a difference between a lulav and a shayfer. A lulav HaGazel, it's possible, you're not yaitze the mitzvah. A shayfer HaGazel, you are yaitze. What's the difference? The word of the Yerushalmi is that in the lulav, you're being yaitze with the lulav itself. You're shaking the lulav. There's no other element here. In the shofar, you're being yaitze with the coil of the shofar. So we can distinguish a bit between the act of gzela, you stole the actual shofar, and the mitzvah came from a result of the shofar, a result of the stealing of the shofar. So Rashi said the same would apply for Megillah. So the feed this shita, l'chera, what would they say in this case with Torah? Also, the Avera and the Mitzvah are not directly connected to each other. You stole something and you copied something. So, and if you want to say that, maybe you want to say the Rif Taka didn't mean to, the Rif maybe was just trying to bring a raya, that the Havamin, the person who said it was mutter, maybe he thought that, mitzvahs just allow you to do whatever you want, as long as it's for a mitzvah, and the Rif is saying, no, look what I mean. You see in Shas that there's something called a mitzvah abba aveda. I mean, if you want to tie a lav dafka, the Rif wanted to say that this is literally a mitzvah abba aveda, but no, at the end, the Rif doubles down and says, va'af oisa mitzvah, sheneskaven lo loy also biyada. He said clearly that you're not, whatever mitzvah you were being mechaven to, you're not yaitze. So is the Rif Taka taking a stance across the board that there's no limits to mitzvah abba aveda? If there's any aveda in the process of getting to the mitzvah, you're always not yetz, you're always considered mitzvah. It's always considered mitzvah abba aveda. Unclear. I saw Taka that someone wanted to suggest that maybe the Rif only meant the mitzvah of ksiva sefer Torah, because we know the Rosh has this vart that not as manazek ksiva sefer Torah to other svarim. So that would be a pretty big chiddush that the Rif, derech agav, the agav is being, the Rosh is after the Rif. So the Rif is sort of implying, without spelling it out, there's a mitzvah of ksiva sefer Torah. It sounds a bit far-fetched. So that's another discussion relating to what the Rif is saying. Now, there are those who are mitzayin on this issue to the Sefer Chassidim as well. The Sefer Chassidim in Siman Tov Shnayim Beis says that echad hayachetev Peresh Hashana tefillas. Someone was grabbing tefillas, a siddur, or maybe they're just pages of tefillas on them. It had zechrenu on them. Back then, most people didn't daven from a siddur. Siddurim were not, produced in quantities. That's why you have all the halachas relating to shots, and that really was relevant and continued up until the printing press was invented. Mela during the year, regular Shemini Esrei, Shabbos, Yom Tov, but Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, that's when it starts getting tough. So someone got frustrated, maybe in the middle of davening, and he grabbed someone else's tefillas. So a Zaken told him, it says, you're trying to daven to Hashem, and you're doing it through sin. So he said, okay, so what should I do? You're right. I did the wrong thing. So he said, you have to go to the person whose tefillas you took, and you have to ask him to lend it to you, and then daven all over again. So similar theme to the Rif, that you're trying to accomplish something tefillah here. There's a gneva in the process. The tefillah is no good. Be'emes, Sefer Chassidim has its own authorship, Chida and others, and they all actually jump on the Sefer Chassidim and say, why? How could that be? Why are they? What about the Megillah? Big talk, big raid on this. Now, in Chabad, we have a number of stories from which it's mashma that when it comes to ksavim of chassidus and things like that, ultimately you're supposed to try to get your hands on it. You try to copy it, not to steal it. That's not a gneva, but even if let's say it's from the Rebbeim and the Rebbeim said there's no reshus, you shouldn't touch it. But over there, what we're saying is that there's really a chitzonius eratzin and there's a pneumius eratzin. The chitzonius, they're saying I don't want you, but the pneumius, they'll be happy if you go ahead and you do it anyway. And b'chal over there, we're not talking about real gazelle. You're not going into someone's reshus and just walking away with ksavim. The idea is that you're sneaking in and you're copying it where it is. It's not the same level. It's not as good as a pikad neither. A pikad, at least they gave it to you. Here, you didn't give it to you, but you're not removing it. And Bam is by a lulav itself. It says that if you steal a lulav is one thing, but if you don't steal a lulav, you just walk over to your friend's lulav and you pick it up, the lay daitay, that's what we say. So there is also, even though Pinigla, this idea of Pneumius Aratzim, that deep down a person wants that mitzvah should be done. Now, a shayla on this theme, we find a shayla on this theme also in this generation. Rather recently in the Shalos of Shuvas Minchas Yitzchak, Chelik Zayin, 7 Kuf Lamed. So there's a letter there, it's undated. It's from Sfira, Mem Gimel Leman B, as we know, Mispar, or whatever Lashon is, it's Rosh Teves that refers to Sfira. And it's a letter to Shlomo Schneider, who's a Rav in Monticello in the United States. And he begins by quoting Rabbi Schneider's Shaila. The Shaila was, he was asked by a Chacham Echad, he's asking for a friend, that he took a sefer when he was a bacher, Shalei B'Rashos from the yeshiva. Why did he take it? In order to learn from it, he wanted to be ba'ayin and something from the sefer. He took it with him, and he intended to give it back. And then he forgot about it, as it happens. And a number of years passed, until he realizes, he still has this sefer from the yeshiva in his possession. So he wanted to return it. At this point, he was embarrassed to return it, so he mailed it back to the yeshiva without his name on it. He was very nervous about it. But before he returned it, he also made a photostat. He made a copy from the sefer because the sefer was out of print. It was from recent Rav. It wasn't a sefer that got reprinted off. So he could be able to learn from it whenever he wants, because apparently the Taka was some good stuff in the Sefer that he wanted. And now he came to Rabbi Schneider, he said that he feels guilty and he wants to know whether he can continue learning from the photostat. Because Saif, he attained it, he got it through an act of Gneva. Now I actually found the Michtav HaShaila of Rabbi Schneider. He has a Shalos at Shuvas, Divrei Shleima, Chelik Daled, Simon Tavkuf Mamalov, you see the whole Shaila. And you see that there it says the year. It was written a few days earlier in Sfira Tesv of Iyar, Tav Shalom at Zion. And Rabbi Schneider himself already seems to be very proficient in the Makaitis. He quotes the Medrash Mishlei, the Ramah, the Shach, the more positive Makaitis. And he quotes the Rif, the Sefer Chassidim, the negative Makaitis. And he uses Befalpul on the whole question of the Shefer that goes on Zion, a lot of Makaitis, Achreinim also. And there in Divrei Shlomo, they also copy the Minchas Yitzchak's Tshuva, which is printed in Minchas Yitzchak, as I said. So this is the Tshuva of the Minchas Yitzchak to this question. He says, your whole question about Mitzvah Haba Ba'avera, so we haven't really spelled out what Mitzvah of Talmud Torah was Arif even talking about exactly. What Mitzvah does the guy lose out on? So Minchas Yitzchak says, B'chlal, there's two inyanim by Talmud Torah. There's Leidas HaMaisa Sheyasum, there's the knowledge, the information, and then there's the mitzvah, the act of studying Torah. That's its own mitzvah. So if you're even talking about mitzvah Baba Aveda, you must be talking about being Yotzei mitzvah Talmud Torah. Like it says in Sefer Chassidim, with the tefillah, it would be Yotzei mitzvah tefillah, so that you would have to come up with something similar to that with Torah. But Masha'enke and all those Mekaydas that say Lo Yavoizu Laganav, not someone who steals Divrei Torah Matikon, that's not even talking about mitzvah Talmud Torah. It's talking about the act of acquiring the information. So there isn't even it's not even really a stira or two different. It's two different yanim b'chlal. What's it saying? It's saying that ultimately through this this information helped you advance you, and it works out. There's a happy ending. You became more knowledgeable. You're more. Bigger Talmud Chacham. So there's really no connection between the two. And it could still be an act of Geneva, and it could still turn out to be a Gadol Yisrael. But anyway, we're not even discussing right now B'diavad. When you did it, was it a good thing, was it not? Right now we're asking a new question, L'chatchila. Can he continue using this copy or not? So the Ben Chassitzak is Meirach on this whole issue of the Pikadon, reading it and copying with our Rishos, so the Talmud Chacham gets into all of that. And then he concludes and he says, what we get out of all of that is, Bevadai, this person who took the Sefer Shalei B'Rishos, what he did was Shalei Kadin. And in this case, you can't even say, what do you mean? But he was learning from it, so it's not like the Sefer wasn't used. No, but there's been a yeshiva here, they're the Rabbim, he's taking the Sefer, he's the Yochid. And anyway, he's mitzayin in Choshen Mishpat Siman Kuf Samach Gimel, which has to do with things that the Bnei Ha'ir could be kaifin zal zeh. They could say this is what we do. So in Seif Vav, it says in Shulchan Aruch that there's takanos kedumos. There are ancient enactments, takanos. Shaloi lahitzi sefer mibeis hakneses b'loi reshus bailam. Not to take a sefer out of shul without reshus. It's there in Shulchan Aruch as an ancient takana. And the Magen Avraham now. The place we may be more familiar with this whole issue of using seforim without reshus is in Eirach Chaim, Siman Yudale, the Gabi Tzitzit, the Gabi Atalis, where it also touches on seforim. The Magen Avraham is talking Mitzayin to here, among others. He's Mitzayin to Choshen Mishpat Kuf Samach Gimel. And Minchas Yitzchak quotes the Gra, the Bir Gra, there in Choshen Mishpat says that even though, at least according to the Gra, for Karet, if the guy brought his sefer to shul and he left it in shul, you are allowed to use his sefer without reshus, because that's what he had in mind. He understood that he's bringing the sefer to shul. So according to the Gra, you are allowed to use a private sefer if it's in shul, because that's the But what we're saying is that the kana keduma is that afal bikain, you can't take it out of the shul. And the same would apply. Minchas Yitzchak says that this medrash of yeshiva, and because you're going to bring it to your house and to keep it there for a long time. And you're being mevatel Talmud Torah of everyone else in yeshiva, and especially you yourself said that the sefer was out of print, or they couldn't even replace the sefer. So if that was b'vadei shalei kadin, and he has to do tshuva, and there's no way of twisting the idea of being maitik shalei b'rishus to say that this is okay, this is legitimate. That's definitely not the case, and you have to do tshuva, etc. What about the ikar shayla if you can use the copy? So she says, first of all, part of the whole discussion with copying a sefer is by copying it, did you devalue the sefer? Fine, let's say that's not relevant here. He says, anyway, in this case, even if the sefer is out of print, he just copied it for himself. It's not like he made illicit copies and started distributing them. So you can use the copy because we don't have the mitzvah. Back then, there may have been a mitzvah that even by making a single copy of a single manuscript, you're devaluating the manuscript. Now there's more than one. Until now, this was the only manuscript. That's not the reality now. So it doesn't matter how many private individual copies you have. But even if it caused a certain zilzal to the sefer, that's where you have the smart chai, the ramah, the shach, that lo yavoizu laganav. So that's what he wants to say. And then he concludes, Amr Lamaisa, near the Inkan Shum Safik, that he's not causing any hefset at all, like we said. But let's say Smidei Kol Safik, if you feel like you want to just be double extra sure. So if the Shayal, we said he's very embarrassed, he didn't even send the sefer back under his name, he should ask the Anhala of the yeshiva through an intermediary, without saying who it is, to get Rishus to use the copy. If you want to go the extra mile, ask Rishus from the Anhala to use the copy, and then it'll be no problem. But again, that svara that he cites in the Gra in Cheshem Mishpat, that sefer in Shul, that's not what it says. If you open the Simon Yudal and Chaim, the Stam, it says there you can't use a sefer because it's mekalkel the sefer, mashenkin a talis. But if you look in the Svarim today, they already quote a lot of poskim that say that today, with today's printing presses, a sefer mamish, it's very hard to be makbid on a sefer. What's the worst that can happen? You'll ruin the sefer, so you'll get another sefer. Or the fact that it's so easy to have Svarim, people are not makbid so much on the sefer itself. Frat, if he brought it to shul and left it on the table and walked away, so then he seems to be accepting that it's normal. You go over to someone's doing a shul, you go to the shelf, you take a sefer off the shelf, and you see someone's name in it. Okay, he left it on the table, it made its way to the shelf. He's clearly not makbid. Obviously, if someone says, Asher l'shtamish b'lider shul, so that's another story. So that's one inyan related to stealing svarim. Another issue related on the theme of stealing svarim, we find in Shulchan Aruch Cheshem Mishpat Siman Shin Mem Ches, which is about Isser Gneva, Umi Nikra Ganev, Umi Eza Shom Eschayev, just basic concepts of Gneva. So in Sif Ches, there's a seif that's written a bit like a story. Bahaktim, before I say the sefer Shulchan Aruch, we know from the Ma'aseh of Hei Teves that part of what happened is that the person taking the seforim at one point was using the assistance of an innocent bystander who didn't understand what was in the heavy bags or suitcases. He asked, "Can you carry it for me?" And the guy became an unwitting accomplice, and he got very frustrated when he found out about it. We're not getting into the story too much detail. But you have something like this in Shulchan Aruch. It's written a bit like a story. It says like this: Reuven tovel Shimon. Reuven comes to Shimon. He confronts him and he says, "You went into my room and you stole my svarim and you took them out of my rishos." And Shimon says, "You're right. I did go into your room and take your svarim. But kach haya hamaisa. This is what happened. Let me tell you. You know who asked me to take the svarim out of your room? It was your daughter-in-law, who's related to me, my relative. Your daughter-in-law asked me to carry the svarim out of your room, and she told me she can't carry them; they're too heavy for her. Can you carry them for me?" And I didn't know who they belonged to. I'm not mixing in. I don't know. She said to take it. I assumed it's fine. And I didn't even do hagbah. I'm not like I'm the ganav here, because she picked them up, and then she said, "Oh, it's too heavy," and she handed them over to me. Now, where does this if come from? What written in this lashon? So the marker for this din and the marker for this signon is a tshuva of the Rosh, Klal Kuf Aleph Siman Zayin, and there are a few extra words. The Shulchan Aruch is mekatzer. He says that I was terech for her, and I gave it to her father. I delivered this svarim to her father. And for the rest of the seif, I'm going to add just small details from the marker of the Shulchan Aruch from the Rosh. So the Shulchan Aruch says, the Rosh says, Shimon is responsible. Shimon is mechuyev like a ganav. He is responsible to pay Reuven back. Because malali kanis b'chadre. Why is he walking into Reuven's room and taking things without Reuven knowing about it? And in the Makar, in the Rosh, she says, Ki kol hamunach bebeis shel adam hu b'chaska shaloi. Anything that's in someone's house, the chazaka is that it's his. And he continues, and it says in Shulchan Aruch, Nikar hadavar shekiven l'saya ligzol chamia. It's pretty clear that he knowingly was an accomplice and knew that he was robbing her father-in-law. Don't buy this story that he had no idea what he's doing. He's tiding that he didn't do the hagbah. She did, but he says that she couldn't carry them. Her whole thing was that, I can't carry them, they're too heavy. And in the Makar, in the Rosh, he says this is like what it says in the Gemara Baba Kama, that if there's a fire and someone else comes and is marba b'chavila, he adds wood to the fire. So the Gemara, the context is a discussion, but the Gemara says, Hei Teves, if not for this wood that he added, the fire wouldn't have gone where it went. Pshita that the person who added the wood is chayav. That's taken out of context, but that's what the Gemara says. So he says that's the situation here. She picked them up, but she couldn't get very far. She couldn't actually take it out of the house. So she's not a ganav. She's just picking seforim up. Who's the one who actually enabled the seforim to be removed from the property and actually be stolen? It's this guy. So havalei ki'ilu hetziyahu. It's like he did it. So now Reuven could actually collect from whoever he wants. He can either go to his daughter-in-law because she admitted that's in her father's rishus, or if he wants, he can go to Shimon, and Shimon is responsible. If you look at the smeh there in Sifkat and Yotes, so it says, what if there's a real dispute here? What if why did she tell him to take this farm out? Obviously, she had some kind of claim. She had some kind of reason to say that she's collecting something that belongs to her in some way. Stamish, she didn't think of just say it's mamish. Literally, let's just rob my shver. But the Smeh says, as long as he doesn't know if she's correct, if she's right, still that should have been a red flag. That should have been a stop. So you don't go into someone else's. If there's a dispute, I'm not sure who's right. No. You don't go and take someone else's stuff because you're not sure who's right. And there don't seem to be any edim here because it sounds like from Shimon that he was made the emes. Sounds like he was his admission, but afal pikein. That's the din. And that's really a topic in its own right that has to do with Gneva B'chlal, not necessarily Seforim. And there's more on that in that simon. I'll just point out that in the Shalos Shuvas Yaakov, he's the author of the Hei Yaakov printed in Shulchan Aruch on Pesach, the Teres HaShlomim printed in Shulchan Aruch on Nida. So in Shalos Shuvas Yaakov, Chelek Aleph Simon Kovayin Ches, he has the following shaila. Shnayim asu gneva b'yachad. Two people did a gneva together, and they divided the gneva. So they did a joint project, and then one escaped. So the question is, can the nignov collect the entire gneva from the one guy that he has his hands on, or can that guy says, no, I only took half the gneva. You can only collect half the gneva from me. So the Shvus Yaakov says, first, this is like the Rosh, and that Shuvah, that's quoted in Shulchan Aruch. Reuven Tainas and Shimon went into his house. However, then he says, if they are in that case, Shimon did the whole thing. So maybe that's why Shimon is responsible for the whole thing. But what if they did the gneva together? They were equal partners in the act, and they each took half. So then maybe you'd think that each one is only chayav for his part, not for his fellow's part. It says in Shulchan Aruch and Siman Taf Yud that the two people that did a hezek together, not gneva, hezek, and one ran away or he can't pay, you can't go to his friend and say to pay his part. Each one is only responsible for his hezek. He says, I saw that the Chavis Yoyer makes this connection between hezek and gneva. If you look in the Chavis Yoyer at Siman Reshit Beis, he says there were two ganavim working as a pair. One climbed up the ladder, went through the window and stole the silver and gold. The other guy was the getaway guy standing on the road, and the guy in the window threw all the silver and gold to the guy on the ground, and that guy ran away. So the shaila is, how does it work? Are they both responsible? So the Chavis Yor, at least at some point in the Shuvah, wanted to tell you that if you compare a taka to hezek, then each one is only chayav for half. But the Shvus Yaakov says, Achare iyan fakert. You can be geiva the whole thing from either one. Because we shouldn't compare it to hezek, we should compare it to a halva, two people who borrowed together, two people who were mafkid together, two people who did a purchase together. They're arevim zelazeh. Everyone agrees to this. So b'meila, we should compare two people who stole to that, because they're shutrim and they're gneva, so they're arevim zelazeh. Kol shekain from two people who borrowed. What about the Rosh? He says in the Rosh and the Shulchan Aruch over there, Shimon lo yaretzel lignoi v'anois atzmi klum. He didn't want to steal. He just wanted to help. So if not for the svara that he's the ikar haganev, then Yitaka wouldn't. If she had done a full hakba and she was able to take it out, and he wasn't really a messiah, then that's why we wouldn't count them as a ganav. That's why we needed the svara that he's the ikar haganev. But if they are working together as a team, they plan together, they show up together, they divide together, that's mamish arevim. There is arva zelazah. And then the Shus Yaakov and the Hisafis in the back, he brings an interesting raya that's connected to the recent parshias. It says, I found a raya from Medrash Rabbah and Vayeshev. It says that after they sold Yosef, so it says, Vayered Yehuda. Right, so then Yehuda has his own adventures. So why is Yehuda suddenly leaving the scene and going off to explore? So it says in the Medrash that he said, let's scatter. And he said, Omer lahem me'asara b'nei adam shenimtzu b'gneva. If there are 10 people that are involved in a gneva, if you catch one, doesn't that mean you caught all of them? Or is one of them responsible for all of them? Something like that. Right. But he gives each one is technically in trouble. Let's scatter. This is also not only shaykh to Vayeshev, this is also shaykh to Miketz. Because in Miketz, you also have a gneva, the gneva of Yosef's Gvia. And I saw actually that the Minchas Asher, Rav Asher Weiss, gave a share on this in recent years. Ishtalzach on Parshas Miketz, where it says that Kedavrechem Kanhu, Ashimotz Ita Yili Eved, Vatim Tunikim. Yosef was insisting that only the person who's caught will be the Eved. And Rashi says that really, how does that stem? Kedavrechem Kanhu, he's saying they're right. They were saying we should all be slaves. And he says, Kedavrechem Kanhu, but only the one who stole it is going to be a slave. So Rashi says, Minadin Kedavrechem Kanhu, Takmanin, you're right. Shekulchem Chayovim Bedover, Asara Shenimtzes Gneva B'yad Echad Mehem, Kulam Nespasam. You have a group of 10 people and you catch the gneva with one. They're all caught. They're all in trouble. That's Kedavrechem Kanhu. But I will do Lefnim Meshur Sadim.
Does that mean halachically or din mitzvah? Because it's not halacha you have to become an evid if you steal.
Okay, fine. That's the din of Mitzrayim. But the question of being responsible in the laws of Mitzrayim, that's the punishment for a ganav. So.
He gave it back to the prophet.
Right. But the Ramban doesn't even want to accept that this is the din of Mitzrayim. He says when Yosef said Chalil li me'asay zois, to take as a slave, but not to take all of them. He says Chalil li me'asay zois. He meant to say that no, Yosef is saying, excuse me, in Mitzrayim, you don't take 10 people, punish 10 people for one guy's gneva, unless they all worked on the gneva together, unless they're all accomplices, they all planned it out. But if one of the chavra goes and does a gneva, we don't even Mitzrayim wouldn't punish all of them. That's what Yosef was insisting Chalila. And the Ramban seems to quote the same Medrash. And he reads it differently. He says, Asara b'nei adam shenimtzu b'gneva ein kulam b'sira. If you catch 10 people, if you find 10 people, one of them has a gneva, they're not all in trouble. So they're agreeing with me, the Ramban says. So you see there's this machlekes between the Rashi and the Ramban. If min hadin, everyone who's with the ganav is chayiv or not. So in Mitzrayim, that means being a slave. Otherwise, it might mean being mechuyev to pay. Like shutfim. But then he quotes this whole the Shvus Yaakov and this whole Inyan, and he notes that the Shvus Yaakov mentions this Medrash, and he notes that the Shvus Yaakov and the Ramban seem to be reading the Medrash completely opposite ways. The Shvus Yaakov seems to be reading it b'tmiyah. Sara b'nei Adam shenimtzu b'gneva ein echad mehem nispas hayidei kulam. So we're all in trouble. We have to disperse. And the Ramban seems to be reading the opposite. That all. If there's 10 people, they're not in trouble. That's why Yosef said, Chalila, you're not all in trouble. And the Minchas Asher points out that we actually have this Medrash twice, both in Vayeshev and in Miketz. In Vayeshev it says, let's all scatter, because as long as we're together, it's a lot more likely that we'll get caught and called out on what we did. And Amar Lahem HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Asar b'nei Adam shenimtzu b'gneva, Ein echad nispas ayidei kulam, and then the Medrash Meishav quotes the Gevia and says, like, Kim matzah sabein avadacha, the taka, when the Gevia incident came up, so then they were all taka caught together. Like, there's actually a connection between the two incidents, that they didn't get caught for that Geneva, but they got caught and were all held responsible for a different Geneva. And then in Parshas Miketz is the Lashon, the way that Ramban quoted it, Kedavrechem kanu, Asar b'neonim shenintzeh echad men b'Geneva, ein kulam ba'asira, whatever that word means. But ani ein yaisake, the way Rashi quoted. So from both places, it sounds more like the way the Shvus Yaakov Taka understood. It's Taka, not the Raya, the Shvus Yaakov Taka brought the case that he was discussing, that two people that seem to be involved with each other, they're both equally responsible. That's another discussion. So, till now, we discussed literally stealing seforim. Although the tshuvas of the Rif and the Minchas Yitzchak did go off into what about copies that were made from a Geneva, but still there was an actual literal act of Geneva in the process. But without going to the extremes of literally taking other people's objects, you have lots of discussions in Tzvara about stealing divrei Torah. First of all, someone who steals a vart and claims it as his own, whether in speech or whether in print. And then, of course, there's different levels. There's someone who steals one vart, there's someone who steals a lot of vart from a lot of people, and then there's someone who literally plagiarizes an entire chibur, different dargas. Then you have a whole discussion about Eimer David B'Shem Eimeroi, and what's that obligation, and what if you don't, let's say you take the vart and you don't attribute it to the author, but you don't claim it as your own either, you just say it, Stam, what about that? Can someone who said a vart, can he be mevater and say, I don't mind if you don't say it in my name, it's fine. B'chalal, there's a whole discussion about the Rishonim. It seems the Rishonim Dafka don't seem to work according to modern rules of plagiarism. You see a lot of Rishonis that get copied from Sefer to Sefer. You also see Rishonim quoting each other without mentioning the name. The Rambam doesn't mention any names come out. You have Me'iri, those Rishonim that just say V'yesh mi, Shapiresh, things like that. So that's a whole discussion. Then there's the question of, let's say you want to give attribution. Do you have to go through the whole chain, so-and-so, from so-and-so, from so-and-so? And Lamashal in this Shiur, right? Each makar that I'm quoting, I looked up, I'm quoting directly from the makar. Do I also have to tell you which secondary sefer I found the Mar Makam in? Right? Then you have the concept of Shuvra Isi, right? You thought of it yourself, you insist you thought of it yourself, and then you saw, it's actually pretty mefurish. Others have said it before, so you say, should you say, or you say Shuvra Isi. Then you have an opposite discussion. What about taking stuff that you came up with and attributing them to other people to make it sound better? That's its own discussion. So this is all adjacent. This is all sort of related, similar themes. And by the way, the whole discussion of attribution isn't just stam. How should you write your sefer? It can have real, financial repercussions. I saw that the Mitzayin too, the same Shvus Yaakov and Chelik Beis Simon Kuf Mem Vav. He writes the following shaila. He says, in the city of Trebich, there was a wealthy man who made a tzava, and he was trying to, tzava wasn't just giving everything away to his kids. He wanted that it should really better their lives. It should be done the right way. So in the tzava he wrote about one of his sons, and if this son is able to darshan, if he's able to get up and start doing public speaking in Torah, so then there's a special sum set aside in the estate. In addition to whatever portion he's getting anyway, there's an extra sum and he'll get in addition. Then the wealthy man passed away. And a short while after his passing, this guy gets up and he starts darshaning. And he comes to collect. Darshan, you see. So the brother said, not so fast, not so fast. And a lot of tightness. He said, first of all, that drasha was terrible. Yafa hayashti kasami dibure. Would have been better if he hadn't said a thing. It's awful. Also, they say, and anyway, yesh lachosh, we're very suspicious that that's not even his own drasha. He didn't come up with it himself. Either he read it somewhere, or he got the tutor to tutor him to practice saying a drasha, and it's not his own. So, that's not what the father meant in the tzava. So the Shuvas Yaakov says, first of all, we have to look for a schus for this guy. Server Mirabanan, someone who's Ben Taira, you have to be Melamed schus. They're tining, he's not a Ben Taira. So still, I already have said elsewhere that even a Bachar Charef, even someone who's just on the level of Bachar in Yeshiva, he's with the program, you have to be Mahapach B'schusai, and especially if he has some kind of reputation. Now, the first taina that the brother said that the drasha was terrible. So that's not a taina. First of all, let me piyam anuchayim. We said we're asking them to tell us how good the drasha is. Not everyone has the same taste in drashas. And he says sometimes Darshan Taka gives a good drasha, and people don't like it. Maybe you can't explain it well, or some other reason. You can't always take down a darshan because drasha didn't go over well. And anyway, bevadai, their father's kavanah wasn't that we're going to sit there now and evaluate how good the drasha was. The kavanah was generally you should darshan b'rabim. And we have this in Gemara also. A person says, I'm a nas, I'm a kaddish, I'm a nas shani talmud. We don't say talmud like Shemin ben Azai. But you can ask him one thing that he learned, and he's able to answer you, and it's the easiest thing. He's a talmud. The condition is condition. And he says, even in Deiras and Yishayim, by the way, even in early generations, we find that those who were able to darshan on higher levels, but they darshan on very simple levels, Pasha, to tell people, Chachma, Musar, the basics. So, and that's the kind of thing that maybe someone wouldn't appreciate so much. But the kavanah of the father was certainly that he should be doing public speaking, even if he doesn't become the world's best darshan. However, the second taina that he didn't learn the drush himself, that he didn't come up with the drush himself, he learned it from others. So if we had Eidim that can prove this, so then that would be a good taina. Because Avada, the father's kavanah was that he should be masmid, he should learn a lot until he's able to darshan on his own. And that's Bram Abba, he's been giving a schus to his father, he's sitting and learning, that's nachas for the father. But just to plagiarize something that's not his, which we find nowadays, and we see this theme in a lot of Sfarim, that you have the people that are taking inyanim that aren't theirs and trying to use to advance themselves. So that's terrible. That's a bad thing, and his father wouldn't want his son to do a bad thing like that. And it says, by the way, even if the father did want, let's say the father was, let's say they're all a bunch of scammers. The son is a scammer. The father also wanted his son to scam his way to the top. If his father wanted that to happen, then fakart, shchiv mirah, that says to do an avera with his possessions, you don't listen to him. And that would be a big avera to condone and to encourage this kind of behavior. That would be worthy of a punishment, not a reward. So we're not going to assume that's the kavanah. And even if you're going to say that fakart, maybe the father taka only wanted that he should be able to hold his own on the most minimal level. He should be able to get up and not learn on his own. In which case, if it's a dover yadua, everyone understands. Look, this guy, everyone knows that he can't learn on his own. Everyone knows that he rehearsed pshat to let someone wrote for him. But that's the most the guy can do. That was what the father of Daka wanted, just that he should put in that little effort. So even if he wanted a time, that which we find, by the way, quotes with Moshe and Yeshua, that Yeshua wasn't saying every time kach amrli Moshe, but it was understood that everything Yeshua says is from Moshe. Same thing with Rabbi Eliezer Talmid Chayesh, B'deish Stam. Everyone knows it's your Torah. But that you can't say, because that's going too far the other way. Because that's, we can't assume that the father meant that. It's only a suffix. And once there's a suffix in the matana, then you can't be Meitzim Echavere. And if there's an umdana, you can't be Meitzim Echavere. But in this case, that's B'chlal if we knew for a fact that he stole the drasha. So then it would to be a problem, because chances are it's not what the father wanted. Not enough. We don't have enough evidence to say the father would have been okay with that. But in this case, where we don't know, they're just making it up. They're just trying to get out of following their father's tzava. So they don't have the kayach, because otherwise, how will their father's tzava ever be fulfilled? They can always say that. And the ein mashbi and all kind of stuff. We can't even make him swear because they're saying maybe. So their options are as follows. Either they can be machrim and say, look, if what you really did was you cheated, you're in chayrim, sort of say that, try to intimidate him. Or we can do a test. One of the lomdim, the fursamim, will put him to the test We'll give him a bavli or a medrash tamua. We'll give him a medrash tamia. Lock him in a room, and let's see if he can come up with a drasha now. That will be the test. And if he comes up with something that sounds good that you can darshan b'rabim, then we'll say, now he's mekayim his father savah, and then he gets the schar for the drasha. There's also, that's one example where plagiarism, the mamish has repercussions like this. Another example we find is the Machane Chaim and the Maram Shik, which I mentioned already in a previous Shabbat Techacha. So they have a discussion regarding the Machane Chaim has the case of a sefer. His name was David. And in history, we have instances where if you play chess, lahavdil, through correspondence. So the cheat is to play two grandmasters off against each other. You write, you tell one guy he's white, the one guy he's black, and you send their moves to each other, and then you look very impressive because you're sending very strong moves. So this guy did that with different Torah. He sent a shaila, maybe a dumb shaila, to a gadol, and then when the gadol wrote a tshuva back, he then sent that tshuva as his own shaila to the next gadol. So he was playing the gedolim off against each other. And it was as if he's the gadol b'Torah, and it went on like this for a while until finally he was exposed. He's an Amaretz, and all he knows is how to write a mezuzah and a Torah, and that's it. And once that was exposed, all the other dirt about him started coming out. That Bechlal, he lives among the Goyim, he's sitting in a guy's house and writing stam. So can we passel this guy from writing stam? Because the main question is, all these years he's been Goyin of Chedusha Eraisa. So the Machane Chaim says that, in my opinion, if you take someone else's Torah, you're taka ganav. Even though it's zenana v'zelei chaser, which gets into the whole question, as I'm going to mention in a bit. But you're allowed to take something that belongs to your chaver and have hana, even if he's not going to be chaser. You're still not allowed to take someone else's stuff. So. And unless you know for sure the guy's not makbid, who wouldn't be makbid on knowing that his Torah, he worked so hard on Torah and someone else is stealing it and passing it off as his own, who wouldn't be makbid on that? So it's according to Machane Chaim, it's taka gneva. But then he was trying to come up with ways to say this guy's not so bad. So he said one way we can say it is that it could be that only if you say it out loud. So that's a maisa. So that's a maisa of gneva. But if you just wrote it, there's not really a maisa over here. It's just writing. He says it could be if a guy learns Torah, even b'machshava, or b'ksav, he's not chayav misa, or a yid who teaches a guy Torah, b'ksav is not chayav misa. And then there's a whole question of can you do a shvua b'ksav? That's our whole. He says I actually don't want to really get into that. That's a bit of a tough question of the gather of ksiva when it's something that's supposed to be b'dibur. But he said I came up with something else. Dafke, if a Talmud Chacham steals Divrei Torah, then he's a Ganav, because he's taka being Nana Mishal Chaveroi. He's someone who's worthy of appreciating what he's taking. But someone who's a boor, who has no clue what he's even copying, he did a Maisa, Kaif Ba'alma, he's just copying word for word in his own handwriting, and he signed his name at the end. He says, that's not really a Ganav, because did he really take it? Did he really enjoy his friend's Torah? It wasn't in his Rishos. He never absorbed it. He never acquired it. Chacham could appreciate, could understand this guy is not like a Ganav. A Ganav, at least, he's able to have a no from the object. Here, can you really say that the guy understood what he was doing? And there's nothing missing either. A Mela Ganav, real Ganav, you literally took something out of his possession. But here, nothing was taken, and his hana is not hana. So he says, Saif Dover, the guy taka is a chutzpah and an aveda, and he's stealing the chachmas hatayra, but not enough to pass him as a sefer. You should do tshuva. And what about the other stuff that came out about him? Then he gets into that. Maram Shik responds to the Machane Chaim, and he has a whole discussion on this question of is it actually gneva at all? And he leans towards saying it's not actually gneva, and not getting into in great detail. This leads us to the other related subject, which is copyright. Can you steal something that someone else created? And what are the rights of a creator, someone who created something? What are his rights to his creation? And what about his right to sell it, or the Yarshim that inherit it? And nowadays, all the forms of photocopying when it says kol hazchuyot shmurot, all rights reserved, etc. Like, how does that work? That's a whole related subject. That leads into the whole question of haskamas. For a big period of time, you had haskamas that said we're asking to reprint this for 5 years, for 10 years, for 15 years, right? So this is actually on this last issue. There's a lot from the Alter Rebbe, the Mittel Rebbe, and the Tzemach Tzedek actually. We find there was the Alter Rebbe. I'll elaborate in a second, but first, in very short, the Alter Rebbe was involved with the rights to printing Gemaras and the Torah. Then you have discussions over the rights of printing the actual Chabad seforim, the Tanya, the Shulchan Aruch, other seforim like that. Then you have a discussion I'm going to mention in a moment about Hanachas. If Torah was said in public and someone wrote it down, is that different than something where you wrote the Sefer yourself? And this actually carries over till today, because the Rabbi used to insist that the Kahas has the rights to Sifrei Chabad and the others shouldn't print it. On the other hand, you have an indication from the Rabbi that the Sikhs that he says publicly might sort of be public in the public domain. So to elaborate a bit more, but trying to keep it relatively short, we find that Alter Rebbe had a whole business going on in the Tafkuf Samachs in the early 1800s of a partnership with Slavita, with printing a Shas and printing a Tur. And in Tafkuf Samach Zayin, the Alter Rebbe wrote 2 letters to say that until now they were acting as my shluchim. So all the haskamas that said that the rights are reserved, no one else can print it for the next number of years, they essentially belong to me, the Alter Rebbe says. And now I am handing over those rights to Rav Moshe Shapiro of Slavita. It's printed in Igros Kodesh with the Alter Rebbe. And one of the letters, the one about the Torah, says that the people that I mentioned were my shluchim, and now I'm being meister v'noisen kol koyach u'schus mehaskamas hanal. So these are skamas that say no one can print it. That was something the Alter Rebbe was able to transfer over and say, okay, those skamas were protecting my property. Now I'm turning it into yours, and you get the power of the skamas. They get transferred over to you. Of course, in Tanya, we find the Askamas, of course, very famously, as part of the Shiur in Tanya, to read the Askamas, and it says you can't print them. In fact, it's been pointed out that there's something very interesting. In the second Defus of Tanya, printed by the Alter Rebbe in Shklov, Tafkuf Samach Vav, there's another Askama from Rabbanim that didn't make it into the Tanya that we use today. And there they renewed the Gzeiros, and they added something very interesting. They wrote, B'chlal ha'azhorehi, you're not allowed to copy this printed sefer by hand. Now we know that the Chassidim in that time was very common that Mamarim, Kisvedach, back then, they were copied by hand. So there was a whole industry of Chassidim who copied Chassidus. And there was this concern apparently that it might be easier, instead of reprinting it, it might be easier to just make a bunch of copies by hand. And that would also undermine the finances of those who spent the money on printing the Tanya. And those who point this out said this is possibly the only such instance in the history where you see that the Haskam is saying, I don't allow you to copy it to yourself by hand. That's the Alter Rebbe. Mittel Rebbe, we find he has some very explicit statements about not printing seforim, and the biggest one is in the end of the Akdama to the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch. Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch was printed by the Alter Rebbe's children shortly after he passed away, starting in the winter of Tafkuf Ayin Dalet. And the Mittel Rebbe writes them, it's signed by all the children, but it's considered the Mittel Rebbe was writing and they were signing on. People today are matter, even when there's a skama, it says Gzeres Nachash, so what's the heter nowadays? They say, that's one Medina, we're in a different Medina. That's only when it comes to printing seforim in the public domain, because can you really ask for printing a shas? Who has control over the shas? And Sagas Gevol is where you are, not where that person is. You don't have the whole world, you don't control the whole world. However, in the case of my father, this is my Alter Rebbe, this is my father Alter Rebbe's own original chibur, and that original chibur has now transferred over. The ownership is now ours. We were zeicha as Yershim, and a person can aser the hana of his sefer to the whole world. Afilu b'seifa elam. So Mamela, our Isser in this case is far more powerful than any other Isser you've ever seen that applied to Sfarim B'chlal. And it's possible here that the Mittel Rebbe essentially was Mechadesh, the more modern understanding of copyright, because it seems like until then you just had this concept of 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. And here the Mitzvah is saying that when it comes to one's own creation, one has full, unending control of exactly how and where and how it can be used. That's the Mitzvah. Then when it comes to the Tzemach Tzedek, you had two big episodes. You had the episode, the whole controversy of the Shas between Slavita and Vona, which is its own historical chapter. There's the whole truth of the Tzemach Tzedek in Yeridei Simukuf Tzedek Hei, and Tzemach Tzedek, in fact, is actually essentially saying he doesn't understand how any of these haskamas work. 5 years to 10 years, he has trouble understanding how the whole concept works. And Yeshua Munshine, in an article on this topic, suggests that for this very reason, he wants to say that Tzemach Tzedek never wrote any haskamas, because he simply didn't believe in the whole concept of haskamas. We do see haskamas or haskama-like activity. You see that Tzemach Tzedek seems to be avoiding the whole thing. The Rebbe used to cite that, the Rabbeim don't write haskamas. There's also from the Sheiris Yehuda also, the Rebbe's brother Maril also opined on the issue of haskamas, and other Rabbanei Chabad at the time on different seforim, on the Shas and on other things. You also have a Tshuva Tzemach Tzedek regarding Torah. It's printed in Shas Tshuva Tzemach Tzedek Choshen Mishpat Siman Ayin in Ois Tes, but just the story part is printed as a letter, also in Ikras Kodesh Tzemach Tzedek. And Tzemach Tzedek writes, Ma'aseh Shehoya Kach. This was what happened. Alter Rebbe used to darshan, and Maril, his brother, used to write it down. Alter Rebbe used to pay the Maril for his services. And the service as well is that once he writes it down, it gets distributed. After Alter Rebbe passed away, it wasn't like something the Yershim had. It was the Maril wrote it, they got dispersed, and that was it. The Yershim did not have a collection of ksam. And then one of Yitzchak Chalatzov, he's writing about himself in third person, put in all the effort, collected from all the Talmidim as many ksavim as he could, and ksavim from other manichim, he doesn't call them manichim, other kaisvim, which weren't as good as the Marils, that are not royal as a shulchan. And this person himself was sat and did work and was mevar which ones looked like that they're the Marils, by being able to tell which is which. He was magia them, he turned them into a sefer, assuming that there's permission from the censor in Russia. This is referring to the Torah. Now the shaila is, if there's a prophet, does he now have to share the profits with the other Yershim of the Alter Rebbe? And Tzemach Tzedek tainas that they didn't have the Kuntreisim, everyone had them. And they weren't involved, they didn't put any time and effort. Only this one Einikol himself put in all the effort. Plus, he even went to the Maharil. Maharil actually wrote them. So he actually was kind of the rights from the Yershim of the Maharil, whatever rights that Maharil has to it. Because in all likelihood, the Alter Rebbe didn't consider himself to be the owner. He probably considered the Maharil to be the owner. Whatever ownership there is, in all likelihood, the Alter Rebbe considered the Maharil to be the one. And even if the Yershim did have the Kuntreisim, at most you can say this is an union of Teves Hana. That the Teves Hana is that you get to print it. But now that you actually own it, and he says this line, even though they're the Alter Rebbe's original thoughts, but they were given over to the public. We compare it to Mitzvah, we have Teves Hana, so making Khan, the Kol Shekein Shekvar, Limdo, Misan and Larabim, the Alter Rebbe clearly handed it over to others. That was the Tzemach Tzedek's argument about Torah that was not written by the author but was delivered in the public domain. So even though Tzemach Tzedek seems to go in the opposite direction, in both shuvas he seems to be against rights, copyright rights. But on the other hand, he didn't actually directly discuss cases like the Tanya and the Shulchan Aruch of original works that the owner, that the Mechaber still controls. In one case, he's talking about a Shas, things like that, and where he says, I'm not sure how the haskamas work. In the other case, he's talking about Titus that were said B'Rabim. So, what the Tzemach Tzedek would have held about actual copyright, would have to be its own shiur to go through all the things that he writes in detail. But like I said, the Rebbe in this generation carried this over and was very makbid that Kahas alone has the right to print things without a minus, you can't just print things on your own. You have actually in the Kut Sichos Chelik Chavav, page 319, there's a special page, big letters, a whole page, like a full page ad, so to speak, in the Likutei Sichos, where it says, and it says it's copying it from a Ha'ara a few pages later, from a Sikha. The Rebbe says that based on the Hakdamas Hamalakit in Tanya, not to print these Kuntreisim, not you, not through others, without Rashos, which is a Hayirah Brura from the Bala Tanya, who's also the Bala Shulchan Aruch, whenever you have this Chashash, so B'tuchani Asher Betach Lo Yadpisu B'nei Yisrael Sefer HaTanya. The Rebbe says, I'm confident that no one will go and print the Tanya today without the Rishos, because the Tanya keeps on being reprinted. So whenever it's within 5 years of the last Tanya printing, you can't print it without Rishos. And good luck waiting for a 5-year window, right? Because like I said, like the Alter Rebbe says, L'shem im Yunam, V'tovi Birkas Toiv. And this seems to be aimed at some anti-Chabad circles who felt threatened by Chabad distributing Tanyas. So the way they wanted to combat that was by printing their own edition of Tanya. You see, you have our own Tanya, you don't have to go to Chabad. So the Rebbe was responding to that and saying, the Alter Rebbe's Cherem is still perpetual till today. Were there other prints of Tanya when? Yeah, like in the 70s or 80s, Satmar printed their own Tanyas and things like that. Yeah. I think my father has one from before he joined Chabad. He bought a Tanya. It wasn't from Karnais. Yeah. Shulchan Aruchs also. There's like a Shulchan Aruch printed by the Malachim with like anti-Zionist screeds in the back. So also, you can buy the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch without. That's already later. That wasn't necessarily for that reason. They just probably considered it to be in the public domain, which Chabad doesn't agree with. Since we're still ongoing, we still own the rights to be seforim. So that's a whole discussion, but the Rebbe clearly believed that this continues still today. On the other hand, like I said, when it came to Sichos, the Rebbe said, "Barabim, there you have more about this, about that." I believe there's a matter from the Rebbe. The Rebbe says, "I said it in public. Anyone can write it down. Anyone can print it." We'll leave it at that. Another in conclusion, and this is Taka in conclusion. Another nakuda that relates to the whole Hei Teves story relates to the aspect of the Yerusha. And we already mentioned, the Mitzvah Rebbe already mentioned that his rights that Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch went over the Yerusha. Although there was no dispute because all the sons of the Alter Rebbe signed together. You see with the Tzemach Tzedek, where there was a lack of agreement about the Torah regarding him, between him versus other unnamed Yerusha. I believe there was also some kind of earlier disputes with the Maharil and the Mitzvah Rebbe. I don't remember or know the details at the moment. After the Tzemach Tzedek, we know historically there was a very big dispute among the Tzemach Tzedek's children, and ultimately there were a number of Chatzeres, a number of competing Chabad groups and Rebbes at the time. There's a lot that was written about it then. I think a lot of it has never been published. But again, the Seforim, one of the issues that came up then was the Kisvei Yad of the Tzemach Tzedek. That was considered a very big part of what the Tzemach Tzedek left behind. I believe that the official psak was that even though the Rebbe Marash stayed in Lubavitch and got to keep the hoif because he had the tzavos that supported that, but when it came to the Kisvei Yad, I believe the psak was that they should divide it equally. However, we know that the Rebbe Marash did not heed that part of the tzava, and he whatever Kisvei Yad he had his hands on, he never parted with. If others had other Kisvei Yad, then they didn't part with those, but he kept whatever he had. The Rebbe Rashab and the Razah, we know also things didn't go very smoothly. In the Shemis, there's a line there that the Rebbe Rashab was mavater on a lot of other things, so he can get the ksavim, so that there wouldn't be a taina on the ksavim. And they came across a yaman written by some Bachar Mistama and Tafshil Memvav during this whole saga that the Bar Levin from the library Verbringen, the Shchedesh Kislev, and he said at this Verbringen, there's a letter of the Rebbe Rashab that has not been printed, where he writes to one of the great Chassidim, and the person writing the Yaman, I think he said was Chaim Ber Volansky. In this letter he writes that he knows that his brother Razah also wants the Ksavim, and this is a big point of contention, but because his father, who was a Rebbe, got to keep the Ksavim, so he was Makabel from his father, he gets to keep the Ksavim, he's not parting with the Ksavim. That's what the Rebbe Levin shared at the time. And actually, the Rebbe, in one of the sichos from this whole period, in Shabbos Parshas Pinchas Tafshim Mem Hey, the Rebbe said that they're trying to bring rayas from the Rashav, from the Marash, that there is a concept of Yerusha. So he says, first of all, at least with the Rebbe Marash, they were fighting over it because they wanted to learn it, because they all felt equal connection to the Torah of the Samach Tzedek, and it was just a question of who's more, is there someone who actually is considered the main successor or not? But everyone wanted to learn it. Mashen came to sell it, what's that? And anyway, in this case, in this instance with the Fidek Rebbe, there wasn't Chalukas HaYerusha B'chlal. And in any case, the whole argument, this is the library of Aguch, it's on a regular estate, etc. By the way, not just Chabad. Chabad isn't the only group where there were tzachsuchim over Yerushas that having to do with holy things. For example, in Sadiger, Ruzhin, after the son of the Ruzhner, from Yaakov, it was called the Alter Rebbe of Sadiger, passed away. There was a big sichsuch regarding his tzavah. He wrote a whole tzavah for his sons, for his daughters, and the sons didn't like it, and they didn't want to keep the tzavah, and a lot of gedolim got involved, and their tshuvas are printed, and the main one was the Marsham. It's in his tshuvas. I also seem to recall that Eli Rizel, who testified in the case, was repeated some kind of incident that he remembered from his childhood, I believe, relating to Vishnitz, which is his background. I don't remember the details right now, and I don't have the testimony handy. There's also B'chlal when it comes to the ownership of Yershim over the actual works that their father created. There's various discussions. Do they, mamish, have full control of the Divrei Torah? Can they prevent others from printing it if they don't want to print it, and things like that? Also, there's a question of, does a Bechor have double, Pishnayim? And mamish finishing here. I mention this because this is another historical dispute in the Shalos HaTshuvas Beis Yitzchak of Rabbi Shmelkes, who was a Rav in Galicia in the mid to late 1800s. So he writes, as a Shaila, he writes to Reb Shimon Sefer of Erloi. The Reb Shimon Sefer of Erloi was the son of the Ksav Sefer, the grandson of the Chassam Sefer. And he says, regarding the Shaila, someone left over Chidushei Torah, can someone else copy them and print them without the Rishus of the Yershim, especially if he actually made the copy while the Mechaber was still alive, or is there Gezel? And he goes into a lot of the basic Yesodus of copyright, ownership, Geneva. But I'll just mention that in Sivav, he says, V'hine b'dim and b'chor neitel pishnayim eravach svarim hanet pasim achar meisaviyim. He said they had this vikuach in Ziditshev, another Hasidic group, after Rabbi Isaac of Ziditshev passed away, and he said they should print the svarim. So there was a dispute among the Yershim as to how do we define prophets, and does there b'chor pishnayim, and he gets into that as well. But just to point out that there have been other, you look through svarim, you find other historical precedents for elements of the Hei Teves story. And I would be remiss if, after all that, I didn't state that there is a book called Schus Hayotzim V'Mekaydes HaYehudiyim by Professor Nachum Rakover, who I believe is still with us. And so I have to acknowledge that talking about Omer B'Shem Omroi, and so I did use his book to some extent for a portion of the Marmakaimus and the ideas in this shiur. Check it out for a lot more on this very interesting topic.